Hi everyone, my name is Claire Kim. I'm the Director of Curatorial Strategy at the Here and There Collective, and today I'm here with Maya Jeffereis at the Bronx Museum. We're currently in the gallery space for the 6th AIM Biennial with Maya's work right behind us. And I'm very excited to be in conversation with Maya to speak a bit more about this exhibition as well as her larger practice. Like I had mentioned, we're currently at the Bronx Museum and we are seated within the exhibition space of part 1 of the AIM Biennial. Could you tell me a little bit about how you were introduced to this fellowship and the kind of timeline to get to where we are today?
Sure. I think I've always known about the AIM Fellowship. It's just one of those major fellowships, and it's been around for 40 years. So a lot of friends have come through the program, a lot of really incredible artists. So I think I applied a few times before I got in, but this felt like the right timing now.
Yeah, it's always the game. I feel like all of my artist friends are just constantly applying to the same ones until it happens, and it always happens in the end. So let's talk a little bit about the work that you are presenting in the show today. It's titled Passages 2, and it's a video work in line with a lot of the themes that you had been working with in the past, but I felt like there's a new level of abstraction that is being utilized in this particular piece. So it'd be great to just get a little bit of information on the work itself, as well as maybe some information on the title as well.
Sure. Okay. So Passages 2, there is a Passages 1, and I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Passages 2, it's a single channel video installation. I'm using 16 millimeter with cyanotype. Digital video that I shot in Hawaii and Puerto Rico. And I'm also weaving together poetry from poets from around the Caribbean and the Pacific. And the work is really coming out of my own maternal history with my great-grandfather who came from Hiroshima and worked on sugarcane plantations on the big island of Oahu. And I actually went on a trip back in January last year to Hawaii to research and try to find any kind of record of my great-grandfather and his time there. Ultimately, I went with my mom. Ultimately, we didn't find anything.
The videos of you and your mom.
Yeah. She was great. She was very game. But we couldn't find any trace of him. Everyone was assigned a bongo number, which is their plantation number. And if you don't have that, they don't exist outside of those records.
I see.
So I started filming and getting kind of interested in this history last year. And that's really like inspiring this piece. So it's kind of rooted both in the history of Japanese immigrant labor on these Hawaiian sugarcane plantations, but it also moves away from that specific history into thinking about these connective histories around the sugar plantation economy, but also U.S. imperialism in the Pacific and the Caribbean. So specifically, I was thinking about 1898, which was the year of Hawaiian annexation, and also the year that the U.S. gained Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines as a result of the Spanish-American War. And how these islands are connected, right, through, kind of colonial economic exploitation, but also I think through histories of resistance and solidarity with one another, and really fighting for their own sovereignty. So I wanted to make a piece that explored these kind of overlapping and interconnected histories, and really thinking about the ocean as a means of connecting.
You had mentioned this in an earlier conversation because oftentimes there was the text that you had shared with me, a scholar that kind of theorizes around the ocean as a tool and a mode of connection rather than a way to isolate. As we often kind of think about island nations or countries in that way where folks on islands are kind of thought of as separated from a mainland. And that seems to be turned on its head within your practice and in a lot of the texts that you're kind of referencing.
Yeah, exactly. So the writer is Apele Haufa, and he wrote this incredible essay, but really thinking about islands not being these kind of small land masses that are disconnected, but really that they're connected by this vast sea and have rich shared histories around oral tradition and language and other aspects of culture. And so I was really inspired by that way of thinking.
Yeah, and I know that in the past you've done work that is very specific to Hawaii, very specific to your family's history, and to then kind of build from there and then think about these other spaces that have this very kind of dark history of American imperialism.
So Passages One I showed back in the summer of 2023. It was an exhibition at EFA Project Space,
Right.
and there was 2 videos that were showing. They were separate, so it wasn't 2 channel, but 2 single channel videos. One was Fields Fallen from Distant Songs, and the other was Passages One. Passages One was abstracting different archival documents. So I actually have a copy of my great-grandfather's immigration records and his ship manifest record. And so I abstracted that using the chemogram process, which really is like kitchen chemistry or like bathtub chemistry. You like mix together household ingredients, and that can help to develop your film. And so, but it creates this kind of distortion and spottiness to the film. And I included other documents like the score from, not the score, but the song lyrics from Aloha Oe, written by Queen Liliuokalani, among other different kinds of archival documents that are all abstracted. And I projected that video onto a sugar glass screen that hung from the ceiling.
I remember this, yeah. And in Passages Two, the sugar cane appears in a very different manner, and yet there is this kind of calling back to Passages One, where there's still this relationship to a sculptural object outside of the video piece itself. And also I'm thinking about your apartment and your studio space there and how you created these, I think they're made of resin, the sugar cane.
They're made out of isomalt.
Isomalt.
So it's a sugar product.
Oh,
it just
I
has a
see.
higher melting point and is stronger. So
Okay.
like professional bakers use isomalt to make like sculptural elements, like on cakes and things. So it actually is sugar. You can eat it.
Oh my gosh.
You don't want to, but you could.
It's edible.
Yeah.
Okay, and you were making all of these within your apartment space.
Yeah. Don't tell my landlords.
You know, I was thinking a lot about the importance of site and location when thinking about this piece, but also your practice in general. Not only are you traveling to different spaces to make the footage, but also you're traveling within the archives and within history to kind of piece these connections and these kinds of soft spots together. And some of it is extremely personal, your family narrative, and others are kind of larger historical narratives that are then kind of tied and stitched within the space.
I mean, I shot at Laupahoehoe, where my great-grandfather worked. The plantation is, no longer operating. There are abandoned buildings, but mostly it's really grown over. But I filmed there. I filmed actually 10 years ago at a former sugar mill in Puerto Rico, not really even knowing this history and this piece that I was going to make now. I did a residency at Beta Local in Puerto Rico, and we walked across the islands and really got to sort of understand relationship to land and culture, people and place through walking. But there was an abandoned sugar mill, and so I was filming there, and that's in this video. Also, footage from my ferry rides between islands, footage from Roosevelt Roads, which is an abandoned U.S. Military site on Vieques, which, they, like many of these islands that have a kind of military presence, Vieques was bombed. There are high cancer rates there. But the residents of Vieques protested and were successful in getting the military to leave the island. So there are these kind of traces. And yeah, I really just was going back through my own archives, I guess, my own footage, and came across this, which actually really worked well now in this particular moment, thinking about kind of global solidarities. Yeah, so I mean, sight is important, but I think also there is the absence of some of these sites and some of these records, and I think it becomes a bit speculative too. I think there's also a kind of like filling in gaps and imagining, or maybe exploring traces or shells, or kind of like these ghostly hauntings that you were mentioning before.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially as the work becomes a bit more abstracted, with this layering of the cyanotype, it like plays within that space, that like very scratchy space.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about Saidiya Hartman, and the way that she writes about speculative fiction, which is really kind of inspiring to me. Like you were saying, with diasporic families, often there's so much that is lost, right, in translation, in the migration, whether unintentionally or forcibly. I'm thinking about my own family history on my mom's side, coming from Japan. I don't have a lot of kind of firsthand accounts from my great-grandparents. I think my mom had some experiences with them, so they're kind of passed down orally, or maybe even through like home movies. But something that has been really exciting was coming across an archive of Japanese hole hole bushi. So these are work songs created by Japanese immigrant women on sugarcane plantations. And they sang about immigrating. They came as picture brides, so they came through arranged marriages. They talk about meeting their husbands and basically getting catfished. They talk about having affairs. They talk about the struggle of having children and also working. It's very rich and it's very all-encompassing. It's not perfect. It's very real. And so these songs have actually been preserved by a scholar named Franklin Odo. So I've been pulling from his archive. There are recordings and there are also texts. And I feel like so often we rarely get to hear firsthand accounts from women immigrants from that kind of generation. I'm thinking about like a couple of decades prior with the Transcontinental Railroad. I think there are no written or oral documents that exist that are firsthand accounts from the Chinese immigrant laborers, which is different from this later wave of Japanese immigrants to Hawaii. So I'm also using and integrating their voices, their actual voices singing these songs into some of my pieces. And this video passages to the Hole Hole Bushi lyrics and text, so both the Japanese and the English translations are being shown on screen. And I've selected a few to create a kind of almost like a loose narrative that is rooted first in Japanese Hawaiian laborers, but then shifts voice to the Hawaiian people, so Native Hawaiians. And I pulled from writing by Queen Liliuokalani. One is called The Queen's Prayer, and she writes about how she lives imprisoned in her own palace in sorrow. Another text is pulled from a song that came shortly after annexation that was really a testament of the Hawaiian people who believed in the sovereignty of their queen and that one day she would be reinstated. So it kind of journeys, from immigrants into Native Hawaiians and this moment of annexation and dispossession. Right. And then it transitions to Pacific Islander poets, really thinking about the ocean as this kind of affirmative space and something that is all-encompassing, that we are like made from the ocean. And it also transitions to a Puerto Rican poet who writes about a kind of knowledge beyond islands and beyond the sea, beyond the horizon. So I wanted it to really kind of look toward a liberated future for all of these places with kind of shared histories.
Yeah, I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
And you were saying that the footage, you went through your own archives for this particular piece. And so it's footage from, you said, even 10 years ago. I don't think, was that the same for Passages 1?
No, Passages 1 is just documents that have been abstracted.
Okay.
But I think because I abstracted them using chemograms, there is a very it's a very watery process.
Yeah.
And, I tinted them blue, so there is a kind of wateriness, and I wanted it to be kind of like, both they are kind of passages in the kind of literary sense, but also throughways or ways of navigating beyond these documents.
Right.
And their own limitations, right? These documents really only give us like name, gender, age, these kinds of bureaucratic pieces of information, and how can I kind of move beyond that? And so I think with Passages 1, it was my most abstract work, which gave me permission to get a little bit more abstract here also, in using cyanotypes, but then also in using the negatives of the images, right? Also as a way of negating the image. So I'm always interested in negating, not representing ethnographic imagery. So the imagery that is with cyanotypes is shot by Thomas Edison from 1898 in Hawaii, in the Philippines, in Puerto Rico, and Cuba. And I don't want to, these were all part of an imperial project to kind of, I think, incentivize the American public into going along with these wars and these kinds of expansion projects. And so rather than show them again, I want to acknowledge their existence, but also negate. So thinking about the negative in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that this is going to be an ongoing series? Do you imagine a Passages 3 in the future?
I have more ideas around this history. I think I haven't really explored the history of the picture brides, which is something I am interested in. I'm also interested in the interethnic solidarity on plantations between workers of different ethnic groups. So, for example, plantations, of course, always have hierarchies, right, of exploitation, with the kind of white Euro-American settlers at the top, often European immigrants, overseers, like from Portugal or Ukraine or Russia, and then the workers from Japan, China, Korea, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Black Americans from the South, were all segregated on plantations in order to keep them from uniting. Because when they did, and they did at different points throughout history, come together and they would fight for better wages and working conditions, and they would often win. I'm inspired by those histories, and I think there's something to continue with this project there. I think it's a difficult time. It is a difficult time in this world. I think what is giving me hope and inspiration is solidarity, and it is protest. It is speaking out in support of Palestinian liberation, as well, which is connected to Hawaiian sovereignty, right, and Puerto Rican sovereignty, and Guam. And so I think that just trying to find ways to speak to that and participate is inspiring. This work is not about Palestine, but it was made during this moment, and thinking about these shared histories of colonial struggle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for
Yeah.
chatting with me today,
Yeah,
Maya.
thank
This
you.
was really wonderful. And like you said, this exhibition is up through the end of March. And hopefully we can connect again soon.
Yeah, thank you. I love
Thanks.
that.